Thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. And here's your host, Chris Cebollero.
Well, once again, it's time for the Ultimate Leadership Podcast. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us as we're getting into that holiday season. I got to tell you, I'm feeling a little jolly. I mean, it is the jolly time, and I'm feeling a little jolly. And today, I'm hoping to give you some of that excitement as well. You know, when we think about our job as leaders, you know, it really is that we've got to kind of set the pace, and, our employees are the wind in the sail, right? But we kind of hold the rudder and we kind of get them in that right direction. And when we think about service and when we think about being servant leaders, it's really important that we kind of change our paradigm and moving away from the positions of command and control and leading from positions of authority and kind of start to think about this new workforce. I got to tell you, today we've got an amazing guest, and I am just so excited to bring her in here. We're going to talk a little bit about servant leadership. We're going to talk about some great books that she has, and our guest is going to be Liz Wiseman. She is the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a leadership research and development firm headquartered in Silicon Valley, California. Recently, Liz has been listed on the Thinkers 50 ranking, and she was named one of the top 10 leadership thinkers in the world. I mean, she travels around the world and she shares her leadership expertise. And she is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author and internationally recognized as a leadership expert. Liz, I want to welcome you to the Ultimate Leadership Podcast.
Well, Chris, I'm excited to be here, and I'm just your excitement was a little bit infectious there.
Well, thank you so much. And I have to tell you, I became a fan of yours actually over coffee. I think it was 2013 or 2014. I was actually sitting in a Panera Bread company reading the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and there was a great article that you wrote on succession planning, and I was an immediate fan. That day I went out to the bookstore. I bought your book, Rookie Smarts. I bought your book, Multipliers, and just spent the next couple weeks just kind of diving through them. And as a matter of fact, as we talk about Rookie Smarts today, that's one of the books that I encouraged my new leaders to read because I think it really gave them an exposure to leadership that they needed to pay attention to.
It's funny when, it was a few months after I finished up Rookie Smarts and people are now reading the book, I did a little study trying to understand what are people doing with this book. And I found that the number one use for the book was people giving it to people who are new in assignments. And it was like they're giving them this book and saying, don't worry, honey, you're going to be okay. Like you're going to figure your way through this new challenge. And I don't know that there's a bigger challenge than being a new leader and a new manager.
Yeah, and I think that that's a whole other show in itself when we talk about the failure of organizations in growing their leaders. But I think one of the things that, I'm really excited to have you here is I'd love to be able to tap into your wisdom about servant leadership.
That's great. And, I don't know if I have any expertise in servant leadership. I tell you what, I think I've developed, and you mentioned that I'm kind of considered this leadership expert. I'm not sure I am. I think if I've developed an expertise in anything, Chris, I think I've developed a deep understanding of followership, and I've come to understand what people need from their leaders and when people walk through the door of their office, when they badge in to the office in the morning, what they want to be able to contribute and what happens when they receive poor leadership and what it does to them, what it does to the culture of the organization. So in some ways, I feel like I have a lot more expertise in followership, but we'll look at the implications for leaders.
I think that that's a great way to put it. And I think if you can look at it from the fellowship aspect, then the service really comes out of that as well. And I think the first question I'll ask you is, how important is the practice of service to the workforce for the success of that organization?
I think the way that I have come to see servant leadership has come through my study of multipliers. And essentially what I looked at how does the intelligence and capability, essentially the talent of the leader, how does that affect the intelligence and know-how and capability and talent of their team? And is it possible that sometimes our smartest leaders end up having a dumbing down effect on their organization? And I looked at that and saw that some leaders end up diminishers to the people around them. Like, these leaders are really smart, but nobody around them gets to be smart, or no one around them actually needs to be smart because they're doing all the thinking and the heavy lifting for the group. In some ways, they're doing a little too much serving of the group. And I compare that to another type of leader I saw that I came to call these multiplier leaders, who used their own intelligence and talent in a different way. It was kind of like the moment when Magic Johnson, well, this is before the days he was Magic Johnson, when he's Irvin Johnson Jr., this young high school basketball player, is a total phenom, but he's scoring all the points for the team. They're winning every game, but he's scoring all the points. And he has this realization, and he comes to this conclusion that I'm going to use my God-given talent to help everyone on the team be a better player. And so it's about bringing everything. And, of course, if anyone has seen Magic Johnson play basketball or seen any of these films from the late 70s or 80s, you know that he was this phenom, this huge player who played huge, but he did it in a way that invited everyone around him to play huge as well. So it's not like, I think it's in some ways a different lens on servant leadership. It's not like he led the team by being kind of towel boy, or cheerleader from the sideline, or even coach to the team. It's more of, how do you use your intelligence and talent in service to the capability of the team? And I think it's just one way to look at how to be a servant leader.
I think that you really bring up that really great, and there were so many different ways to kind of follow up on that. But I remember the days of watching Magic Johnson and his, one-on-ones when he was playing Larry Bird, and you always loved to watch when the Celtics were playing the Lakers. But you kind of jumped to your book, Multipliers, and I got to tell you, it's an awesome book. How the best leaders make everyone smarter. And you talked about diminishers, but you also talk about multipliers as well. So maybe you could just give us an overview of the two and how they relate.
So a multiplier leader is a leader who amplifies the intelligence of people around them. And as I studied these two different kinds of leaders, diminishers and multipliers, I looked at what do they do differently? How do they think differently? What are their assumptions and their mindsets? And what impact do they have on others? And maybe I'll just jump right to the impact that they have on others. We find that diminishing leaders get less than half of people's capability, whereas multiplier leaders get virtually all of it. And I've been studying this calculation, this number for the last 8 years. And we find that there's this 2x differential, and in some organizations it ends up a 3x, a 4x differential. And we find that these multiplier leaders just get so much more from other people. We give them our full know-how, our intellect, our creativity, as well as our discretionary effort. And it really, that outcome comes from how these leaders think. The multipliers tend to have this assumption that people are smart and they're going to figure it out. Whereas the diminisher tends to have the assumption that no one's going to figure it out without moi. They become the genius of the organization. And we find they do some things very differently. The first is how they manage talent. Diminishers tend to be acquirers of resources, whereas multipliers tend to be utilizers of people's genius. The second difference is the environment they create. Diminishers create stress. They're like tyrants, and multipliers create safety. There's been a lot written. Amy Edmondson's done some really interesting work. Charles Duhigg's done interesting work around emotional safety and the need for that on teams. But they not only create emotional safety with other people, they create intellectual safety for people to take risks, to think differently, to make mistakes, to go big. The third difference is how they set direction. Diminishers tend to give directives. They're know-it-alls, whereas multipliers are challengers. They ask big questions. They invite people into new possibilities. They challenge people in ways that maybe make them uncomfortable and perhaps even a little scared. which is, I think, in and of itself, an interesting angle to look at servant leadership. As opposed to, hey, what do you need from me? Let me be the servant to that need. Sometimes the best way to serve someone is say, here's what I need from you, and I'm going to serve you by giving you a really big challenge that's going to serve the organization. And so sometimes I think servant leaders are very uncomfortable. And then the next two differences is how they make decisions and how they drive for results. Multipliers tend to be diminishers tend to be decision makers, whereas multipliers tend to be debate makers. And how they drive for results, it's probably no news to anyone. Diminishing leaders tend to be micromanagers, and they suck the life out of us in the process, whereas these multipliers tend to be investors, and they give other people ownership. Say, hey, how do I use you for my objectives? They put other people in charge. They give other people the majority vote on an issue.
Yeah, they give them the empowerment to do that. And as I kind of mentioned, as we started off, where we could talk about a whole show of how organizations, don't invest in their leaders or grow their leaders. I think the question that came to my mind as you gave that answer was, with these diminishers, is this an egotism problem, Liz, or is this poor leadership or professional development on the part of the individual and the organization?
I used to think it was an ego problem. When I started this research, Chris, I saw these narcissistical, tyrannical, bully-like leaders. And I saw how they squashed other people. They were like energy vampires, sucking energy and intelligence out of a room. And it was quite dramatic studying them. And, these leaders tend to dominate the news or on the headlines. But you know what? In some ways, that was a red herring to what I think is the real problem. And that is that most of the diminishing that's happening in our organizations, and I would go beyond just saying in the companies we work in our community organizations, in our churches, and even in our homes, most of the diminishing of others that's happening is coming from really well-intended leaders who don't have an ego problem. It's not like they're showing up every day trying to prove that, they deserve to be there, that they're smart, that, mommy and daddy love them, or whatever it is they're trying to prove. They don't have an ego problem. They have an awareness problem. And they don't realize that we often end up diminishing others while holding the very best of intentions, which is one of the places I study this is in church organizations, where I find in some ways, the more noble our intentions, and in some ways, the more noble the cause, the more likely we are to end up diminishing.
I think that makes great sense. And as you were, kind of giving us and leading us down that road, I started to think about, the current workforce and where we are today. And, for the first time in history, there are 5 generations in the workforce, and the leaders that are out there are, trying to figure out the environment of how to lead these new generations, and the millennials are making up over half the workforce. But now the millennials are starting to integrate into the leadership side of the business as well. So I guess, the question I have for you, do you have a feel now when we think about servant leadership, when we think about, all the tools that we have as leaders, what is the future of leadership going to look like as we move into the next the 2020s?
I think there is a really a new model of leadership that's emerging, and I think millennials are helping to lead the way. But I should say that millennials don't necessarily make better leaders than boomers, Xers, whatever. Everything in the middle is they want a clear pattern of leadership, but that doesn't mean that they're good at doing it, at least not yet. But here's one of the things I think the millennials bring is a lot of them come into the workplace not aspiring to be leaders. They don't come in with this mentality of the senior executive is the pinnacle of success, and that's what I want to do, and I'm going to be groomed for that, and I'm going to prepare myself for that, and I'm going to go through the hazing experience that exists out in the corporate world to groom and prepare people for senior leadership. They're like, first of all, I don't know what you guys do up there at the top of the organization, and I don't think I want to do that. And so they bring a little bit of a disdain for leadership that I think in some ways is extraordinarily helpful, because here's where I think I see the future of leadership going is to a very fluid model where, unlike, what was the show? Not Price is Right. Once you buy a vowel, it's yours. Or once you get a prize, it's yours to keep. Wheel of Fortune. Yeah. Unlike Wheel of Fortune, it's like, once you earn a prize, it's yours to keep. A lot of people have been operating under the assumption is once you become a leader, it's your mantle to keep. Like you're now in management and you're going to stay in management. And there's a model that's emerging where it's much more situational based, and it comes, it goes, it rises and falls kind of like the tide. Whereas you need, and Google is one of the companies I think is doing a very, very good job hiring for this. It's actually one of Google's 5 hiring criteria is to look for what I call fluid leaders. But they want people who can go into the 2:00 meeting and be the boss and be in charge and know how to step up, take the mantle of leadership, lead the team, be strong, be courageous, be a multiplier, do all those kinds of things. But they can then leave that meeting and walk down the hall and go into the 3:00 meeting, and they can be a follower. And they can have one of their peers lead, and they quickly get in line, or one of their supposed subordinates, or a junior person from across the organization and the hinterlands, and they can say, what do you need from me for this project to be successful? And they can as easily assume the role and the stewardship of follower. And it really is like from 2:00 to 3:00, and then now back to 5:00, you take the lead on something, and it's knowing when to lead and when to follow, and doing this dance, because that's how we're going to be able to move with agility.
And I think that culture truly is in the works right now. And you can see that in the newer organizations or the transitioning organizations. And sometimes when we go in and help these organizations, grow, do organizational process improvement or grow their organizations, they're kind of stuck in that old culture. And the ones that are making that transition are the ones that are being the most successful. But I want to go ahead and talk to you about Rookie Smarts, because I must have read that book probably 3 or 4 times. I've got it highlighted with different colored markers, and it's almost like a Catcher in the Rye kind of thing for me. But so,
you're going to make me my eyes water.
Okay, well, Chris. I don't want to do that. Well,
I'm gushing over here with delight. That because when you write a book, it's funny. Authors talk like, "Oh, is your book a bestseller?" And becoming a New York Times bestseller is sort of the pinnacle of success. I feel like success as an author is like, A, does somebody read your book? And B, does someone do something with the ideas in there? And so I'm just thrilled.
One of the things that you get from it very, very quickly is the impression that when you know the least, you're kind of at your best. And I was just hoping you could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we have this almost like a prima facie assumption, this just generally held belief that we get better with experience, and that years of practice and doing something equates to mastery, and that we're better at something the more we know. And the more we have expertise, the better we are. And I think we are now working in a world where that perhaps is no longer true, that perhaps technology has allowed our business cycles to spin so fast, and change is coming at us so rapidly that I don't even know that best practices matter much anymore, because you learn how to do something and you're like, okay, I'm now skilled, bring on the next problem. Well, the problems have changed. I don't know about you, but I'm finding trouble reusing my knowledge because, and maybe, our smartphones are the ultimate like microcosm of this. Like just when I learn how to do something on my phone, it changes. And I have a car that's all internet enabled. And every time I figure out how to, play my favorite songs, the interface changes. And, the software's been updated and I have to learn something new. And we're finding that in the current environment, it's not what you know that matters. Right now, it's how fast you can learn and how quickly you can face a new problem, a new interface, so to speak, learn it, perform, and then not be too rocked off center when it changes again. And so I think there's 2 ideas that come out of this. One is like, let us not be surprised if rookies prevail in the marketplace right now, both upstart, startup kinds of companies, but also young professionals or professionals who are maybe quite mature, but are tackling a new problem or a new challenge and come at it in a very, very different way and maybe end up creating disruption in the market. So I think that's the first idea, is that, what we do tend to be at our best when we know the least, because we're learning mode, we're in questioning mode, we are in networking mode, we ask, we challenge, we don't have intellectual baggage that attaches us to an old way of working.
Yeah, and I think that eventually that moves into complacency as well, which kind of brings me to my next question, where if you can define for us, because you talk about being perpetual rookies. So, I mean, how does that help us in the long run?
Well, Chris, you and I are in a mind meld, because that was the second point that I ended up not getting to. Is I think the second point that came out of this research was that, what we need right now is we need ways to stay perpetual rookies, despite years of experience and mastery. How do we keep working with the same level of hunger and humility that we once had when we were doing something for the very first time? And you mentioned before that, it's very easy for companies to get stuck in these old management models. Well, it's really easy for managers to get stuck and end up really misleading their team, because right now, I think, if I had to characterize where is leadership going today, it's not only this fluid model of you're in charge, you're following, you're in charge, you're following, you're following, you're following, you're in charge, but it's also about we need as leaders the ability not to lead people to a better place, but to lead people in the dark. Because we don't know where the destination is. We're often embarking on a journey. We're like, well, we don't really know where we're going, but we have to be able to recognize it when we get there. I think we have to be able to lead people as we wander in the wilderness a bit. So we have to ourselves stay in this rookie state. And I think there's some easy ways to do that, and then there are some hard ways to do that.
Yeah, I kind of like how you said that. And one of the things that, I've kind of always talked about is that sometimes we, as far as leaders, what we know will get in the way of what we don't know. And it really kind of knocks us and knocks the organization and knocks the workforce off their kilter, off their keel, and really kind of does more detriment than good.
Well, that whole notion of how does what we know get in the way of what we don't know but need to learn, for me, it was very autobiographical. I came out of Oracle, where I had spent 17 years there, and I was good at what I did. And, I don't know that I was really good at a professional skill set as much as I really knew how that Oracle world worked. People used to, I remember the president of the company, every time new executives would come into the company, I'd always say, go see Liz Wiseman. And, they'd probably say, who's Liz Wiseman? Why do I go see her? She knows how to get things done here. Because they would often say, hey, you know what? Ray told me to come see you. You know how to get things done here. So I had built this mastery of that system. And when I finally decided, I had to make a decision. Am I going to stay and spend the rest of my career in a single company where I'm a little bit of a master of a domain? And the company was changing and evolving. Or am I going to go out and try something totally new? Well, against the advice of everyone who proffered an opinion on this, they all thought I was crazy to leave. I left this great job. I was well paid. People appreciated what I did. And I went out on my own. And this was this lingering fear. I felt like, wow, I feel like I finally have amassed a body of professional knowledge and expertise and a reputation. I'm like, how is that going to end up becoming a liability, sort of a millstone about my neck? And that actually might cause me, maybe it's hubris. Maybe I become blind to things because I assume the rest of the world works the way my little tiny world worked over here. And I was, I had a good friend who asked me, what's the question that you're holding this year? And I'm like, well, a year is a very long time to hold a question. And I decided that was my question of the year. How does what we know get in the way of what we don't know, but perhaps need to learn? And it was actually several years later that I decided to really go in and dig deep to understand why it is that we actually tend to be at our best when we know the least.
Yeah, I had someone say to me one time that sometimes our biggest weakness is our overproduced strengths, and it kind of goes in that line. But Liz, I got to tell you, I mean, we've really gotten to the end of the show, and I don't even think we've touched, scratched the tip of the surface as to the expertise and the things that we can talk about. But I want to be respectful of your time. So if folks want to engage with you, if folks want to get their hands on these great books, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, let me see. On social media, I'm on Twitter. I tweet out, multiplier tips and various things. I'm at Liz Wiseman. The books, boy, you can just go to, Barnes & Noble. You can go to Amazon.com, put in Multipliers Rookie Smart. You'll find them. There's multipliersbooks.com is a website for the book, and there's all sorts of resources in there, and rookiesmarts.com as well. And you can find me on the wisemangroup.com. So, you know what? Or our basic search on Liz Wiseman Multipliers or Rookies is probably going to get you everything that you might need.
And I got to tell you, I just want to thank you once again for joining us. And this has been a great time for me. And hopefully, the listeners enjoyed it just as much as I did.
Well, Chris, I'm very delighted to have spoken with you. And I hope we get a chance to talk again.
Yeah, promise me you'll come back in 2018 and we'll see if we can come up with another great conversation.
We'll do it.
And for everybody out there, I want to thank you for joining us once again. I got to tell you, man, we got a couple weeks left to this year, and you really need to start thinking about your goals. You really need to start thinking about your plans. You really need to start thinking about your vision for 2018. And this is all about leadership development and professional development. We have a great guest on today. She gave us a lot of great expertise and tips, and let's start following those so we can have a successful 2018. I want to thank you for joining us once again on the Ultimate Leadership Podcast, and I look forward to chatting with everyone again real soon.
Thank you for joining us. The Ultimate Leadership Podcast is a production of ChrisCeballero.com. You can interact with us by email at ultimateleadership16@gmail.com. All rights reserved.